I think it's going to be a very interesting conversation. We're going to make sure that we get to hear from you as well today. So be prepared to participate, because we're going to be asking you about your reality as well. We are pleased about language. We have one of the speakers speaking in Turkish today. So if you're an English speaker, please make sure you log in to the English channel, please, to make sure you can follow up everything. I think we're quite a few people already, so I think that I don't see any reason to delay. I will pass the floor to Mihail, our facilitator. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Darine. Welcome, everybody. Today we have very interesting session about human mobility and urbanization. This is very intriguing topic because human mobility and urbanization are going hand in hand. 10 years ago, we did a study in Europe and Central Asia. We look on social inclusion of people, and we try to see how personal characteristics, societal drivers, and local conditions work together. What we find out that urban centers, economic centers, they provide a lot of opportunities, even for people who are not so privileged in other localities. And that explains a lot the pattern we've seen in Europe and Central Asia over past years, when we witness a lot of mobility, both internal and external, when people move into urban centers, economic centers, capitals. However, during past 2-3 years, we witnessed a lot of new dynamics. Conflicts push a lot of people out of their regular habitat, and they start moving, finding new places, and very often they find out themselves in unfamiliar cities. Climate change is also affecting migration patterns quite significantly, maybe not that visibly so far, but this will be a very big factor in coming years. All these put pressure on urban localities. In 2015, when a wave of migrants passed through Balkan states, we witnessed a huge pressure on municipalities, and we provided, UNDP provided assistance to municipalities to provide services both to local population and to passing migrants in this very new reality. So this is a topic of our meeting today. We will discuss this, and we have 3 distinguished speakers. First will be Oxana Maciuca from UNDP, and Oxana has very extensive experience working on migration, mobility, and development issues. We will have 2 representatives of UN Habitat, and Mariana will present for both herself and her colleague Katya, who unfortunately didn't manage to meet us today. And last but not least, Dr. Abdullah Aksoy from Gaziantep Municipality will share very practical examples how Gaziantep Municipality deal with all these issues. You will have a translation on the interpretation button in your Zoom. You could choose between original, English, Turkish, and Ukrainian translation. I will show green, yellow, and red cards to us to stay on time. Every speaker has 10 minutes. We have a chat, and you could type chat questions, which we will address at the end. And of course, you will have an opportunity to open your mic and speak in there. So without further ado, I would like to invite Oxana to present her part on new realities of mobility and development. Oxana, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mihail. Dear colleagues, nice to meet you. I'm very happy to see such an interesting audience today, and I'm happy to see a lot of familiar faces as well. So with your permission, I will start sharing my screen. Mihail, please let me know if you can see it well. Okay, good. I will try to be as short as possible. I know we have a very busy agenda today, and I will try to provide a bit of I would kindly ask the participants to mute their microphones. Otherwise, I think you have questions addressed to me, and I will try to listen very carefully to what you have to say. And I assume this is not the case. So coming back to my presentation, I will speak today about some key considerations on the linkages between human mobility and urbanization, and without, of course, digging into the topics that will be addressed later by our colleagues and by other speakers. My hope is that I will be able today to set the ground for a very interesting discussion, and I hope I will help you initiate some interesting debates on this topic. So it is not a secret that the world is becoming increasingly urbanized. And as much as I wanted to show you the trends in the whole region, because the region that we are covering at the Istanbul Regional Hub includes 5 sub-regions, but also 19 countries, I chose Central Asia. Why? Because looking at the latest data that I have seen and that we looked into, this region seems to be a very good example that shows the actual trends and the actual linkages that are visible already between urbanization and human mobility. For instance, if we look at the numbers, we have the urban population trends visible in Central Asia. Specifically, I mean, I have here the 5 countries that are included in the region. And this is Kyrgyzstan, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, and Turkmenistan. And you can see already from the numbers that you have here that when it comes to Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, actually, these 3 countries, they have doubled or even tripled their population until 2050. And this is something to keep in mind because this requires a lot of efforts. This requires a very systematic approach. This requires concerted efforts from all the stakeholders that are there. And we're not talking only about municipalities and local governments, who are obviously the first one in the first line when it comes to deal with this. We are talking about civil society, we are talking about the private sector, we are talking about the local communities who are very much impacted by that. And last but not least, we are talking about the migrants themselves, the internal one and the external ones. So this, I will leave it here just for you to start reflecting on the topic and understand how exactly the world is being shaped by the largest human mobility in history that we are all facing. Now, the second thing that I wanted to draw your attention are which are the main factors that are impacting human mobility, that are impacting urbanization through human mobility. And obviously, the main push factors are usually the same. We have the industrialization, right? We have the commercialization, we have social benefits and services, better employment opportunities, modernization, rural-urban change, and you name it. But the interesting thing is that I will not go into each of these topics because then I will need probably the whole hour just for myself. But just to keep in mind one important thing, if we try to link human mobility and urbanization specifically, it's not only about the fact that people are moving to countries because they want to get better opportunities. Very often, people are moving from rural to urban areas specifically because they are migrating abroad. They see better opportunities abroad and they want to achieve them. So coming back to their native countries, they are trying to move internally as well, specifically to seek these better opportunities, better services, and so on and so forth. And I will leave it to my colleagues to dig more into this topic later on. So this is an important thing that we need to keep in mind when it comes to the linkages of these 2 dimensions. It's not only people moving from rural to urban. It's also how external migration influences the decision of people to decide to migrate from urban to rural areas. Key consideration number 3, and this is about opportunities. This is actually one of my favorite topics, I think, when it comes to these linkages between these two dimensions. If properly addressed, urbanization and human mobility can together provide significant social and economic opportunities for host communities. And I'm speaking now about host communities. If key consideration number 2 was about the benefits that human mobility and urbanization bring for the migrants themselves, here I'm focusing more on the benefits that it can bring to host communities, right? For instance, if we speak about the fact that urban migrants can contribute to the local development by bringing knowledge and expertise and the skills that they have. At the same time, migrants, when they come, they usually don't bring only their families. They bring a lot of qualifications and skills. And very often, these are the qualifications and skills that are missing in these specific areas. Or these are the skills that are required because the local population is not ready to work in these areas. Also, very often we can see that the informal economy, as much as we like it or no, it helps provide livelihoods to millions through the tax payment and many other ways. Last but not least, education. By migrating to urban areas, migrants have access to better education. And we will speak about this later as a challenge, but this is an opportunity because closing the education gap can have long-term benefits for the whole population, for the local community, for the arriving migrants, but for the country and the region in general. Now, key consideration number 4 is about challenges. Of course, we always try to look at the positive dimension of these two pillars, and we try to see the best part in it. But when it comes to an increased migration to cities, this usually requires a very big demand for services and requires obviously a more systematic and complex approach. On behalf of everyone who is involved here, I will try to take you through each of these challenges, again, without stealing the thunder from the speakers who will come and will follow. I would like to start by talking about the socioeconomic inclusion of urban migrants. Whenever migrants are arriving to new cities, they are arriving with the need to have access to all the necessary prerequisites in order to be able to live in this new urban setting. And here it is very important to create the necessary premises for their sustainable socioeconomic inclusion in these urban settings without imposing an additional burden on existing services and needs, but also without creating conflicts with the local population, which often is also struggling to find jobs, to access services, and so on and so forth. Now, there is a high demand in the healthcare system, right? And very often, without the access to healthcare system, migrants are facing the risk to disease transmission, or are facing the risk to impact the population, or actually are facing the risk of accessing their basic human rights. So this is why it is very important to ensure that they have access to healthcare system on one hand, and on the other hand, they have access to exactly the same rights and services to which the local population has access. The last one is the access to public transportation as another key to inclusion of urban migrants. Waste management is another topic that is very often discussed, and it's something that we have seen now happening not only in a rural urban setting, but also an international setting where you have an inflow of refugees, of displaced population. This is definitely something that requires specific engagement and response from the local authorities. And last but not least, it's about social cohesion. While we don't speak that much about it, and we usually try to focus more on the services part when it comes to the movement of the population from rural to urban areas. Social cohesion is a key element to keep in mind, because very often when designing services tailored to migrants, we forget that we need to make sure that the local population has exactly the same access to exactly the same services that we provide to migrants who are coming to these new urban settings. And besides that, we need to make sure that we design activities and initiatives that bring people together instead of separating them. This will contribute to a positive discourse toward migrants and will help them build a more healthy society together. Of course, always keeping in mind that we need to preserve the cultural identity of both the host communities and those arriving. And the last but not least, it is something that probably entails all the other key considerations, is that if properly addressed, human mobility can bring a huge positive impact on host communities, on migrants, on their families. But this is something that I will leave for reflection for you. And I hope that with the exercise and engagement that we will have later with the help of my colleague Darini, we will be able to hear more from you. How do you see human mobility contributing positively to the development of the urban settings which are hosting migrants, internal, external, and refugees? This is over from my side, and I look forward to continue this discussion with you later.
Thank you very much, Oksana, for introductory discussion. And I already spotted a couple of really interesting points. So let's go to the second presentation from our colleagues from UN Habitat. And I invite Mariana to present their part. Mariana, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mihail. And I'm very happy to be here today. Thank you very much for inviting UN Habitat to this urban discussion today. So my name is Mariana. I'm working at UN Habitat in the headquarters, which is based in Nairobi. So I will bring a number of reflections that we have and examples and tools that we have developed at UN Habitat at the global level, but we also believe are definitely applicable in the context of the region. If you allow me, I will share my screen as well. And if you can, Mihail, kindly confirm that you can see it. Excellent. Thank you very much. Just a very brief word about UN Habitat. We are the UN agency mandated by the General Assembly to promote socially and environmentally sustainable towns and cities. And we promote a better quality of life for all, and it's insisting on for all in an urbanizing world. So as I mentioned, our HQ is based in Nairobi in Kenya, but we work globally to achieve this goal. We are the focal point for SDG 11 that promotes sustainable cities and communities. Interesting to note that the key message of this slide, that SDG 11 is not a standalone SDG. Actually, 60% of the targets across the SDGs have an urban component. So it really links with the majority of the SDGs, and strongly links with a number of SDGs as well that relate to urban mobility. We then make link with existing framework. We work a lot as well to achieve the Global Compact on Migration and the Global Compact on Refugees as example in terms of human mobility. But then our focus is really on the urban area and how these global frameworks translate into the urban area. We have one key document framework, which is the New Urban Agenda that you may have heard of. And the New Urban Agenda as well recognizes the strong linkages between urbanization and urban mobility. An important point is when we talk about urban mobility, it's regardless of the kind of mobility. So we are talking here about refugees, about returnees, about IDPs, about migrants, about people on the move in general. We recognize that they need specific attention, also for the reasons that Oksana explained. We recognize as well that they have the same human rights as the others. And it also, and that's the key point for us, it also recognizes the key role of local governments in addressing the challenges that human mobility can bring, but also recognizes the opportunities that it can bring to the cities and the positive impact that it can have on host communities. So how do we implement and put this, this framework in action? The new urban agenda recognizes three main values: inclusion, innovation, and integration. And we have a number of categories that we've identified for the implementation of the new urban agenda. We basically look at what is required to make cities an inclusive place for all. What are these environment these elements that makes it that enable social inclusion. So we will look at national urban policies. We will look at the urban legislation and regulations. The planning and the design of the city is a key element. Of course, without resources, cities can't achieve these goals. And the number 5 about the local implementation is really putting at the core the role of local governments and the fact that integration and the success of the implementation of the new urban agenda starts from the most granular level of the city. It starts from the neighborhood, starts even from the public space down the building, and even in the building itself. So yeah, we strongly support local governments to achieve the different parts of the new urban agenda, guided by a number of planning principles that you see on the left. I'm stressing this because it's extremely important as well when we talk about human mobility. As Oxana mentioned, it's a key driver for urbanization. So achieving these planning objectives also ensures that we provide urban settlements that are inclusive and for all. Maybe I will propose you to go through a number of examples that I think are useful to understand like the kind of intervention that we can have, or examples of good practices from countries and other cities, be it implemented by Habitat, also by other agencies or partners. I think there is one case that is a really interesting one when we talk about this enabling environment that national governments can provide. This is the case of Uganda, where at the national level, the government of Uganda has developed and implemented a policy that is extremely inclusive for refugees. Uganda is one of the countries in Africa that hosts the highest number of refugees, 1.5 million. And since 2006, the government of Uganda avails refugees with the same access as nationals when it comes to access to social services, freedom of movement, access to national health and education services. Uganda has been, like the government of Uganda has been increasingly pushing in that direction, adopting new policies over time. Just stressing one here, in 2015, increasing the self-reliance for refugees, which also had a very positive impact in social development to Ugandan nationals. You can see this reflection from the World Bank in 2022 in areas where refugees were hosted. The access to services, including education, health, even access to large infrastructures such as roads, has actually increased and benefited everyone. We are really strongly working at UN Habitat in creating this policy enabling environment. I'm just flagging here like 2 tools that we have developed and that I also invite you to consider. One that we developed jointly with the IOM, funded by the EU, about it's a tool that we developed to ensure that migration issues are integrated into urban development interventions. And very soon, later this year, we will launch a quick guide to mainstream migration in urban policies. So in all parts of the government, in all activities of the government, how can we ensure that migration issues are included? Because inclusion of migrants starts from there. Inclusion also starts with a few some key elements that one of them, of course, is security of tenure for the people on the move. they leave a place to go to another place, and the security of tenure there is a key element. And also we have a few examples where improving the security of migrants actually had a very positive impact on all. We have this example in Afghanistan, this project that's focused on supporting Afghan refugees to reintegrate inclusive urban areas. And it translated into a presidential decree that basically allocated suitable land for the reintegration of IDPs. And then this supposed a complete review of the land system in Afghanistan that eventually benefited all and providing security of tenure to all in the country. As UN Habitat, like one key area of intervention is urban planning, of course. I will give just two examples of inclusive urban planning solutions. One of them, so this is in Burkina Faso, where basically based on the spatial analysis of how the city is expanding, what is the natural trend of expansion of the city, and what are the areas that the city is occupying. We supported the municipality in identifying plots for IDPs, increasing as well the integration of the neighborhoods in the city. I see that now it's orange. I have to speed up a bit. And of course, in terms of planning, one key element that we will look at is how can we make people participate in the planning processes. I like this example that we developed together with the UNICEF. It's inclusive in two senses. It's how do we include people on the move in the design of the places where they live together with the host communities, but also looking at specific groups within the groups of migrants, including the children. And for this, we have developed a number of tools. This one, for instance, is using Minecraft as a participatory planning tool, where actually the inhabitants of a neighborhood become the planners and they decide for their neighborhood. So they are from the analysis and the diagnosis of the situation in the neighborhood, they are also invited to design and invent the city that they want and the neighborhood that they want. And this has proven to be a very powerful tool to bring social cohesion, to make community better understand each other, and to improve the living conditions for all in the neighborhood. Inclusion is also something that we can measure. Just quoting this example here, in Barranquilla, so in Latin America, we have developed those social urban inclusion markers that actually benefit to everyone. I can show you on this map. So this is a map of Barranquilla. You see that the data that we have collected goes to a very granular level, even to the neighborhood level. And that actually stresses the capacity that the city has at neighborhood level to provide the services that people need. And again, this is an excellent guiding instrument to allow us to identify how we can improve and where we can improve access to services to all. So again, with this consideration for all parts of the population. One very last slide. Of course, without financial resources, social inclusion and inclusion of migrants is something extremely difficult to achieve. So cities need the adequate tools and financing instruments to achieve this transformational change. Of course, each funding mechanism comes with opportunities and challenges that you can see on the slide. And as Habitat, we strive to help local governments to develop and implement the financing tools that will equip them with the funding streams they need to adapt and to shift to this paradigm that comes with human mobility and urbanization. Yeah, maybe I will stop here. And we'll pass the floor back to Mihail and the next speaker. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mariana, for really interesting presentation and really intriguing presentation. And one observation which I made in chat that GIS technologies could provide a lot of information for analysis and action. However, what is interesting is not just shots done by satellites or other tools, but participatory interpretation and marking of maps. This could be a game changer. And without further ado, I would like to pass the floor to Dr. Abdullah Aksoy from Gaziantep Municipality, who will present us perspective from Gaziantep on these issues. Sayın Abdullah Aksoy, lütfen.
Evet, öncelikle herkese merhabalar. Çok teşekkür ediyorum beni davet ettiğiniz için. Bu toplantının önemini biliyoruz. Birçok benden önceki konuşmacılarda
And the speakers before me have already shared their perspectives with me. That's why we have learned a lot. If you allow me, I'd like to share my presentation. Of course, Gaziantep is a city of civilizations. It has been hosting many civilizations. Sorry, we can hear the Ukrainian chat at the moment. Is there any problem? English speaker is, the Turkish interpreter is speaking at the moment. Can you hear? As I said, Gaziantep has hosted many civilizations. Of course, in the point where we are, for the last 12 years, especially after Syrian crisis had exploded, we have been affected a lot because Gaziantep is border with Syria, has a border with Syria. That is, it's one of the most affected cities from Syrian crisis. But of course, as the previous speakers have already stated, during crisis, actually municipalities are the entities which are affected most because social support to citizens, infrastructure and superstructure of the cities, and social measures to be taken are directly related to municipalities. Also, this holds true for the other disasters, but also migration is affecting municipalities a lot, as I said. Of course, Gaziantep Metropolitan Municipality, from the very first day in 2011, when the migration started, is dedicating its efforts to sustainable development and social cohesion in order not to leave anyone behind. We have carried out very successful services. We have catered very important services throughout this time. I will be trying to share some of these works with you. Of course, urbanization is day by day increasing in the world. Cities are occupying only 2% of the surface area of the planet Earth, but it has 70% of global GDP. So they are very effective in terms of greenhouse gas emissions, global waste, and global energy consumption. 60% of global energy consumptions is coming from the global cities. The world experienced a global pandemic. We were wondering whether would it be possible to observe a migration from cities back to rural areas. But today we see that except some specific examples, there is not a mass migration towards rural areas. So by 2050, we estimate that 70% of population will live in the cities. If this situation will be managed well, and if we have an inclusive perspective, the cities can become very important socio-economic centers if we can do this without leaving anyone behind. As I said, for the last 11 years, we are facing a crisis, Syrian crisis, and the migration coming from Syria. These are the most affected cities. Hatay, Gaziantep, Şanlıurfa, Istanbul, these are Turkish cities, are shown with reds. We have a refugee population between 400,000 and 500,000. Actually, in Istanbul, there are more than 500,000 Syrian citizens. And the pink areas are the cities which are hosting a refugee population between 150,000 and 200,000. When we look at Turkey, we see a population around 85 million inhabitants. According to the up-to-date data, we have 3.3 million Syrian refugees, which constitutes around 4% of Turkey's population. And in Gaziantep, we have a 2.1 million population, 435,000 of which is composed of Syrian refugees. And 20% of our population is composed of Syrians. Actually, you know, in 6th of February this year, we were affected by the biggest earthquake in the world, actually. It affected 11 provinces. When we look at the map, we see that the cities hosting highest number of Syrian refugees have been affected most gravely by the earthquake. First 7.6 and then 7.4 magnitude earthquakes had been experienced by our country, and there were other earthquakes over 6 magnitudes and 10 earthquakes more than 5 magnitude. These are consecutive earthquakes. Actually, when we look at Turkey, we see that these 11 cities, which are hosting a lot of Syrians, have been affected very seriously by the earthquake. 2 big earthquakes and the aftershocks. Especially, this created an important pressure on municipal services. As Gaziantep Metropolitan Municipality, we are catering services not only to Turkish citizens, but also to Syrian citizens in terms of humanitarian aid, accommodation, and health services, healthcare services. The same services provided to our citizens are also catered to our Syrian guests. As I said, Gaziantep Metropolitan Municipality is going through this crisis for the last 12 years, and from the very first day, we have asked this question as Gaziantep people. The municipalities, governor's offices, and all public agencies have asked this question: do refugees cause a social, political, and economic destabilization? Our answer had been created as a result of a series of meetings and workshops. And when we looked at the cities and countries which have managed migration and learning from their experiences, we can comfortably answer this question. And as a result of this study, this is the answer which we have obtained. Refugees do not cause destabilization, but poor leadership and policies do. Poor leadership and policies can cause destabilization. This is not only for migrants, but also for our citizens. And we can see this very easily. Actually, as Gaziantep, we don't think migration phenomenon is a problem to be solved, but a reality to be managed. And for the last 12 years, we are continuing with this understanding. We have taken important steps in terms of migration management. I'd like to share 3 of them with you. First, the short-term humanitarian response was very important during the hard times of crisis. So the public agencies and hosting communities have done their best to respond to needs in short term. And this was a unique example in the world. But we don't still know when the Syrian crisis will come to an end. Neither state, nor NGOs, nor municipalities. So, in order to decrease the pressure over the city, and in order to enhance social cohesion, our approach was structured around the concepts of resilience, social development, and integration and cohesion. And the first migration management branch office had been established in Gaziantep Municipality as a municipal branch office. In order to resolve these problems, we needed a dedicated unit rather than palliative measures. That's why we have established this branch office. And in order to look at this issue from a scientific perspective, we have cooperated with Koç University and Bilkent University to develop an interactive social cohesion model. Still, we have a project with TÜBİTAK. TÜBİTAK is the Scientific Council of Turkey. We are aiming at creation of a migration model as a result of this migration management model. Another work we have done is related to local solutions related to internationally displaced people, International Forum on Local Solutions to Migration and Displacement. We created a Gaziantep Declaration. It highlighted the importance of cooperation among local governments, national governments, and NGOs with a focus on mid-term and long-term integration policies for a comprehensive refugee response. We were successful in this. After earthquakes, because of the problems, especially experienced in 11 cities, we are planning to organize an international municipal forum in Gaziantep. Scientists and other scholars will share their scientific ideas with us. Gaziantep's migration policy has a humanitarian approach based on social justice and human rights for refugee communities and host communities. We are trying to resolve issue with a human-centered approach in order to come into terms with the new situation. In order to adapt to the new situation, we had to develop a series of policies. Municipalities are mostly associated with infrastructure works, but now we have a crisis. Actually, we have to follow the principles of do not harm, leave nobody behind, and conflict-sensitive planning principles. We don't have only traditional tasks, but also we have other responsibilities such as education, employment, and livelihoods. Actually, these are central government's works, but still, in order to cope with this refugee crisis, we had to enlarge our mandate in order to cope with the problems seen in education, employment, livelihoods, protection, healthcare services, social services, and humanitarian aid. With the centers established, we have created places where both communities are being educated together, taking social support, studies for disabled people, works for disabled people. In humanitarian aid and in healthcare services too, we tried to dedicate our efforts towards both communities, host and refugee communities. Of course, we have cooperated with many UN agencies, public institutions, central governments, entities, international NGOs, local Turkish Syrian NGOs, and international agencies. UNICEF, UN Habitat, UNDP, UNON, IOM are some of the UN agencies with which we are working together in order to enhance our capacity and in order to have more experience. As a municipality, our approach is that any individual in the city creates our target audience. Without having any discrimination, we have to cater all municipal services equally. And in these 12 years, we can say that this can create a social development model for the whole society to work together, to integrate them into this process, to listen to them, to listen to the refugees coming from Syria are very important points to consider, because this is not something we will decide by ourselves. We are also taking them on board for this decision-making process. Of course, United Nations have some short-term and mid-term targets for sustainable development goals. And as a result of these targets, we are doing our best to comply with this SDG approach. Briefly, we can say municipalities have an important role to play, not only providing social services, but host communities and refugees, but also in building resilience for a sustainable development without leaving anybody behind. Of course, this is not charity work. This is an international legal and humanitarian responsibility. This is not a favor. As a result of all these works we have made, Gaziantep as a city and municipality received many international awards. Our target, our goal is not to leave anybody behind and to make both communities work for development. With this program, which is centered around humanitarian development and sustainable development, we had been invited to OECD Champion Mayor for Inclusive Growth Network. All the works we are doing are in compliance with international covenants, as well as humanitarian principles and the principles of our conscience. If we own this city, if we make this city a part of development and stability, both communities can live happily and with welfare. And Gaziantep is one of the most peaceful cities in the region. Gaziantep also was fourth biggest city in Turkey in terms of export volume during pandemic. So Gaziantep model was an important approach for having all these people a part of this development, and only in this way we can take new and important steps. I think we are coming at the end of my time. Thank you very much for your kind attention.
Çok teşekkür. Very interesting presentation with a lot of practical details. I think my main takeaway is it's two things. First of all, I very much like you're saying this is not a problem. Migration is not a problem to be solved, but it's reality to be managed. We will witness migration all the time, but dynamic nature of migration should be managed. And that's why it's very interesting to see distinction between short-term emergency response and longer-term dynamic social cohesion model which you developed. I see that you maybe you didn't say it explicitly, but I feel that you did a lot of experimentation looking how it could work. And these all happen within an enabling constraints. So you don't impose straitjacket policies, but you told, okay, our enabling constraints, our approach is to leave no one behind, do no harm. This is general principles. Let's see how we could work together in this environment. This is really, really interesting. I think very valuable for our participants. And now I would like to give a floor to Darini, because we would like to do some interaction through Menti. We still have a chat where you could put question. I already witnessed a couple of questions, so we will address them later on. And now, Darini, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much to our speakers. I think we have a lot of insights right now. So we want you, the audience, there are about 64 people in this conversation. So we want you to tell us about your reality. We want to hear from you. So we're going to do a little Menti exercise. I'm putting the link in the chat right now. So you can either click on the link or go to Menti and enter code 34283104 and take your time, reflect, but we're going to ask you to raise your hand and unmute to talk about some examples in your community. So we want to make sure you get to participate and you get to share as well. I'm sharing my screen. Can you see my screen all right? Perfect. So first question, how hands-on is your municipality in managing human mobility? As we said, human mobility is something that's going to happen. It's all about how it's managed. So how do you feel that, oh, we see a lot of could do better? I'm going to ask a couple of you to unmute in a minute. We have one that is successfully involved. That's what we want to hear as well. I'm seeing 7 answers and you're 63 in this call. So I'm expecting more answers to come. Take your time, but we want more to be there. I'm going to ask some of you to unmute, and I'm going to start with the green. We're going to start with is successfully involved. We want to hear success stories. Tell us. So the 2 people who said, who voted green is successfully involved. Would you mind raising your hand, unmuting? There's only 2 of you, so please raise your hand and unmute. So please share your success story. We want to hear about those case studies and have more than Gaziantep to account for. So any one of the 2 people who said is successfully involved, if you wouldn't mind unmuting yourself. And we have translation, so feel free, any language you feel more comfortable in, please share. I have all day, don't be shy. I'm gonna wait for you to unmute. Who are the 2 people who said successfully involved? We really want to hear from you. If you cannot unmute because you are in a noisy circumstance, please tell us in the chat as well. That's also something that we would be really happy to hear from. While you do this, I'm going to move on to the 9 people who said could do better. The 10 people who are saying could do better. Would anyone mind unmuting themselves and sharing what you mean by that? What are they doing? What could be done better? This is something that we want to get. So either successfully involved or could do better, please raise your hand and unmute yourself. So Mihail can be able to give you the floor. Again, we're not going anywhere. I know you're here. Please share. Yes, Yasmin.
Hi, colleagues. This is Yasin from UNDP. So I'm not an urban studies person and also not an expert on the matter. So apologies if I'm not technical enough. So I'm speaking on the maybe experiences with the Istanbul municipality. I answered could do better because I actually don't know what they're doing on human mobility. So they can maybe advertise what they're actually doing on this pressing matter that impacts Istanbul, which is one of the largest metropolitans in the world, with a population of maybe 10-folds of many nations, and a lot of which are migrants, both internally displaced people, urban-rural dynamics, but also refugees in Istanbul too. So it's a problem, it's pressing, and I have no idea what they are doing as a municipality, but I also don't know what their legal flexibility and mandates are either. So maybe Abdullah, they can bring some light on that too. Thank you.
Thank you, Yasmin. Please, Dr. Aksoy, if you have anything to respond to this, how do you make sure the population knows?
Evet. Söz bende değil mi? Şimdi tabii ki
Of course, as I explained in my presentation, we work with the civil society organizations, we work with the central government and also other local administrations. And this is what we call the Gaziantep model, because our model relies on cooperation and coordination. Our mentality is leaving no one behind is important. And in order not to leave no one behind, we need all actors to get involved, to get on board. This is a reality that we need to manage rather than a problem to be solved. This is why we need the involvement of the civil society organizations and other actors. Gaziantep is the second largest city with the Syrian population, but when we think of the population, the percentage of the Syrian communities, we have more people in our society, in our local community, because 1 out of 4 of our population is Syrian, which is not the case in Istanbul even. So they are benefiting from all these services as our local people do benefit. We do not exclude the refugees from all these services. We have been providing all these services to these people on an equality basis for 12 years, and we accelerated our efforts following the earthquake. There is one more quality in our city. There are 6 different industrial zone sites, so there are employment opportunities. This is why migrants and refugees try to reach our city and they can easily work in our city. So based on these facts, we see that following the city of Istanbul, of course, Istanbul has higher number of Syrians, but when we look at the rates, when we look at the percentage, Gaziantep is number 1, or let's say it is one of the highest populations. Since 2017, 2018, we are talking about what we did experience, and we underline one fact, that municipalities should be more active on this issue. In some cases, some other municipalities may refer to the legislation by saying that this is not our responsibility, this is the Directorate General of the Migration Management, this is the issue of the Ministry of Health, this is the issue of the Ministry of National Education or the Turkish Red Crescent. So some municipalities may not fulfill their responsibilities, and we do not see, for example, Syrian beggars in the streets. So in some other cities, we see that Syrian refugees are begging in the streets. But in our city, we eliminated the problem of begging Syrians. How did we achieve? We organized a meeting with these people, we informed them about their rights, and we ask their needs. And if this is an issue that we should solve through social aids, then we provide the social aids. If they are in need of employment and jobs, then we provided employment opportunities to these people. This is what we achieved in 12 years. It is important to eliminate the risk of any conflict or hostility between the host community and also the newcomers. This is our success story. Otherwise, there could have been more problems if we had said, if our municipality had said, this is not my responsibility. We didn't say this. We acknowledged this fact, and in addition to our services, traditional services, we covered these refugees. We covered these people because we know the city well. We know we are the organization, institution that knows the best in our city. This is what we did in this period.
Thank you, Dr. Aksoy. I'm going to call out Mariana and Oxana as well, our two other speakers. Do you have any thoughts to add to Yasmin's thought about how does a city communicate better what they're actually doing to manage this? Last week, we had our urban talk on collective intelligence and citizen engagement. How do we connect the dots and how do we make that happen? Oxana or Mariana, if you have any thoughts.
Thank you, Darina. I was actually planning to unmute myself. I will answer your question as well, but I really wanted to raise the issue of why some municipalities are not doing enough. It's very often not about the fact that they don't want to do it. Very often it's just about the lack of skill and understanding of how things can be done and on the potential that a proper and effective management of human mobility in urban setting can bring benefits. And very often we have seen that it's about the engagement. And when we speak about engagement, people often are saying, okay, who is it on board? We have municipalities. Okay, we have other institutions, we have governance, but very often you have to think out of the box. Very often it is the civil society who plays a key role, and Mr. Abdullah already mentioned that several times. Very often it is about engaging the private sector, the ones who are actually creating jobs and giving opportunities to those migrants arriving in urban settings. And last but not least, it is about the migrants themselves. We need to engage them in the decision-making process. We need to engage them in designing the responses which are tailored to their specific needs and expectations. Of course, having on board the local community, having on board the local population, hosting them. This is the only way we build social cohesion. And this is a healthy way of designing a response that matches the reality and the needs of all the involved actors. Over from my side.
No, 100% align with the points made from Dr. Aksoy and Oxana. I would add as well, in addition to the participatory processes in the governance of the city, that also makes the initiatives much more visible, since everyone can also have a say on it and share ideas. In addition as well to the capacities of the cities, there can be also the capacity issue, but also like the resources. And as Oxana said, the capacity to think outside of the box. Usually when cities face those large influxes of migrants, it's unprecedented and there's no one-fit-all solution. So usually it's also about being a bit creative, imaginative, and daring to reaching out to other actors, to the social, to the social organizations, to the private sector, to various range of actors.
Thank you. I see there's a lot of questions in the chat already, so I'm going to move on real quick to the next question that I wanted to ask the audience, and then we're going to move on and make sure we have enough time to address all the questions that have been posted in the chat. Thank you very much for asking those questions. So now we're moving on to a word cloud. We just want to hear some words from you. The question is, what are the opportunities to turn human mobility into a force for good for cities? So we talked about management. We talked about how it's not necessarily, like, I think the end of the Gaziantep presentation was very powerful to that extent, saying, okay, this is a force for good. So Oxana also introduced with a lot of challenges. So, and we had wonderful case studies from UNDP as well. So what's stuck with you? We want to make sure we take the time to write this down. What are the opportunities? The opportunities that are there to make this happen. So you could have up to 3 responses. Feel free to share in any language you want. It doesn't have to be in English. We have translations for this, so we'll be more than happy to take your answers. So anything, it can be for jobs, it can be for so it's economic opportunities, it can be any other things. So make sure you share your answers in the Menti. I'm gonna just make sure to repaste the Menti chat so we have it. If you ever closed it, we want to make sure that you have it there. So the Menti is the same link as before, with the code right here. There we go. So the Menti is in the chat. Please feel free. Thank you so much. So degree homologation. Oh, very interesting. I like that one. Involvement of diasporas. That's a good one. Thank you so much. Keep them coming. culinary diversity. Culture is very important. You're absolutely right. Myself, I'm based in London, so I feel very very lucky. Celebrating the cuisines. We have quite a few foodies in the room. I feel like the cultural aspect of it, the melting pot of it, or the salad bowl, depending on what area of the world you are, is indeed something that's gonna change the local reality. Social cohesion, very nice. Foreign financial flows, it's an interesting one. Remittances and a lot of things are very important to the GDP to some countries. Cultural dynamism, I like that we're talking about culture. We have remittance, finances. Involvement of diaspora is quite nice. Maybe I can just ping you real quick, Oxana, on this one, because I think you would have quite a few comments on this. Please share.
Thank you. I didn't edit myself, but I will gladly talk about this topic. Indeed, when it comes to the diaspora engagement, it is a bit of a different setting usually, because when it comes to diaspora engagement, these are the people who are contributing to the development of their host communities while being abroad. But this is exactly the same way how we can actually engage the benefits of human mobility for the development. For instance, we have really good examples in the region where local governments, where municipalities have managed to bridge diaspora with their native communities back home and implement joint projects back home. And I'm not talking about humanitarian, I'm talking about concrete development projects where diaspora have invested in building infrastructure back home, in designing new services back home, like waste management, you name it, education services. It is about bringing their skills and knowledge back home. And a very close example to my heart, since we're speaking about these rural-urban movements right now, and the urbanization processes, as a result of the Ukraine crisis, we have seen a strong inflow, a big inflow of refugees into municipalities, right? And Moldova was one of these examples, since we're speaking about our region. And it was amazing to see how local governments, how municipalities managed to bring on board new actors, unusual actors, to support the response of an inflow of refugees in this case. And they brought to the table diaspora members who managed to intervene in short term and respond and support the efforts of the municipalities in providing the necessary support and services to the inflow of refugees immediately. So this is just one example, but obviously there are many ways to reflect on that. And what I can say is that while being abroad, we are speaking about more about the cases when migrants are coming to municipalities and are already putting a burden on the shoulders of services and municipalities. However, we must not forget that these exactly are the people who are abroad, and these are the people who bring with them a lot of knowledge, challenge, money, additional funding, additional resources, additional networking, and additional possibilities and opportunities for development. Over from my side.
Thank you. Stanislav, yes, please.
Hi, Verini, and hi, Oksana. Thank you for your answer. I would just like to elaborate a bit more like on diaspora engagement. Also, there could be possibility with connections related to trade. For example, there are lots of Ukrainian enterprises that are trying to enter foreign markets, specifically European markets, right, and other markets as well. And through diaspora members, they're also trying to establish links with the partners abroad, and also diaspora members trying to help them to get represented at the trade exhibitions, for example, right, and also connect them to the foreign partners. Because like to start the cooperation between different enterprises could take some time, especially it's the matter of trust. But if the person who is already there in the country and who you already trust can introduce you to the Ukrainian enterprise, for example, this process is much more faster, and it's very well done in a fast way, an effective way. And also, for example, now there is also a process of engaging again diaspora members to support Ukrainian businesses through provision of consultancies, those Ukrainians who already living abroad and possess necessary skills and knowledge could also potentially transfer this expertise to Ukrainian businesses who are trying to put their footprint abroad. Thank you.
Oh, absolutely. That's a very, very relevant point. Thank you very much for sharing. It's very actual as well. Before we move on to the Q&A, I just want to give maybe Mariana and Abdullah, two other speakers. Is there anything that you want to react to? Any other? Because I think social cohesion is one, new skills is one that's bigger, so it needs more people. As I've highlighted that. If you have any comments before we move on to the Q&A.
Maybe I would add as well, maybe on the diaspora discussion, like I very much agree with Stanislav's point about the solidarity that is created. And in several cases as well, we have seen municipalities getting connected thanks to the diaspora, like talking to each other because there are some residents from a city to another to another city in another country. And yeah, usually those links also facilitate the cooperation across the borders. So yeah, I really like this point and I'm grateful to the person who raised it.
If I may, I would like to thank, I think, who asked this question? Yasemin about Istanbul. And I would like to ask Oxana, Mariana, and Mr. Aksoy to reflect on this, because what I notice in Istanbul, Istanbul is a huge city. It's 15 million. It's 5 times more than my home country. But Istanbul is a city of mahallas. It's small neighborhoods. And it's whole difference in which mahalla you live. And what I noticed in Istanbul, some mahallas are more preferred by some migrants, some mahallas preferred by other people. And you could talk about internal migration in Istanbul. And we noticed this difference when we worked on social economic impact of COVID crisis in different countries. For instance, in Uzbekistan, this is the very same system. Rayon level, municipal level are not that important as mahalla. And I would like to get your reflections, because Istanbul is one reality. Gaziantep is a big city, but it's much smaller. And in case of Moldova, a lot of people came to small towns like Orhei, like Yedinets. They are really small. I don't think it's even 50,000. They are really small. So this is a little bit different realities. And I would like to get your impression, because Mariana showed very interesting slide how you look on different levels of interactions, and you have certain interactions on the level of municipality, but then you go on the level of neighborhood and the level of common public places. This is could be a really interesting discussion how we manage this. So I kindly ask Oxana, Mr. Aksoy, and Mariana to reflect on this in the order you like. Thank you.
Mihail, can I ask you to, you said so many things, the question.
How the local condition affect how you deal with migrants? Because it's one story in big city like Istanbul, it's a little bit different story in medium city like Gaziantep, and it could be different story in a city like Orhei, Yedinets, so.
Okay, I will try to reflect on that, although I think I touched upon it during one of my previous interventions. The situation is definitely different for several reasons. First of all, the capacities of the local municipalities. You have different capacities when it comes to a bigger municipality, and you have totally different capacities when you have a small village. You gave the example of Moldova. We have villages of 5,000 population where we have some inflow of people coming, right? So this is one thing. This is the main difference. The second difference is the access to resources and money. Bigger municipalities usually have much bigger access to funds. to various funds. And this is where local municipalities and smaller communities have to be really creative on how they can bring on board new resources, new actors, and new ways of solving issues, right? Thirdly, it is about the availability of services and institutions. In bigger communities, in bigger municipalities, you usually have services which are available at the municipal level. Not in every country you have the decentralization of the services, and not everywhere you have access to the services that you would have in a bigger municipality. Again, additional burden on the municipalities, on the local governments, how to manage that. Sometimes you need to create new services, sometimes you have to think how you respond to their needs and how you do it. So this is on one hand. And on the other hand, you have the local community, which is hosting the refugees. And here, I think this is the best part, because when it comes to a bigger city, yes, you have access to better services, to better jobs, you have better opportunities for sure, including maybe education or other things. But from the logistic point of view, and let's say the human one, I think smaller communities are often much more preferred by some of the, not always again, but it's much easier to integrate in a smaller community. It's much easier to adapt to a specific local context, and it's much easier to engage. Because when we speak about the socioeconomic inclusion of migrants in general, it's not only about offering services to them, it's about engaging them in the design of policies at local level, of services, and of various responses. So I think it is different, it's bad, it's good at the same time, but it always resumes to the capacities of the local governments and municipalities, which are extremely different from one situation to another. I hope I answered the question. Over from my side.
Thank you very much, Oxana. Mr. Abdullah, your reflections.
Evet. Şimdi aslında Mihail Bey Gaziantep küçük dedi ama Gaziantep'teki mülteci nüfus bazı...
Mihail said that Gaziantep is a small city, but actually we have our refugee population in Gaziantep is much bigger than many European countries. And even or from many European cities itself. We are speaking about around 3 million refugees. Also, there are some people who have come because of earthquake. And also there's an internal migration into Gaziantep. For the 11 and 12 years, in international meetings, it was estimated that this would take, the Syrian crisis would take a few months or at most 1 year. The regime would be overthrown and a new administration would be established according to the predictions. But actually, this didn't happen. And Turkish Republic didn't follow the settlement policy. They are already close to the border, where in 3 or 6 months, at most 1 year, they would go back to their countries without pushing them into, or without sending them inside of the country. But now it's 12 years. And because of settlement policies had not been followed, this created a pressure on some cities. We have much less Syrian population in Black Sea, for example. Istanbul is a metropolitan city, of course, and it's a commercial city. So, of course, that's why we have much higher population. And Gaziantep is following Istanbul. And also we have around 400,000 in Şanlıurfa and Syrian refugees in also other cities. What is the difference? Of course, there's a racism which is also happening in Europe. The migrants and migrant policies are prone to nationalist and racist discourses. We had a recent election in Turkey. For example, some of the parties had developed racist discourses. After this pandemic, there was an economic shrink process. Some people have fled to nature, but then earthquake followed the pandemic, and people began to think that this was due to refugees, because this was a cheap policy to follow. They tried to divert the reaction to refugees. Were they successful? Yes, to a certain extent. We didn't have fascistic discourses until now in Turkey, maybe only 2 or 3%. But now there are fascist-like discourses which have vote around 3 to 4%. So some mayors and some politicians try to stay away from these discussions. They ignored because while we were trying to create a city where both communities could live together, now they began to think about the reaction that can come from electors. That's why they were afraid of this, and from municipality to municipality there were changes. In Istanbul, in Gaziantep, of course, there are more refugees in some neighborhoods. And there are people among the newcomers, rich ones, medium income ones, and low income groups. Now we don't have refugee camps in Turkey except a few points. 98% of the refugees are living within cities. Of course, they are preferring the neighborhoods which is suiting to their economic situation. There are some neighborhoods where the rich Syrians are living. Medium-income groups are living in medium-income neighborhoods, and low-income groups are living in low-income neighborhoods. So they are trying to have the same life as they were in Syria. But actually, we don't want this, because this causes ghettoization and segregation. This neighborhood belongs to Iranians, this Afghans, this Syrians. We don't want to have this situation. We want them to be together with Turkish citizens. That's why we have to take measures against ghettoization. In Gaziantep, we are doing our best to prevent this ghettoification. But when we don't have local governments in this, when people are politically coward, they cause more negative results. They don't want to involve in this issue, but this time they are facing with worse results in midterm. They have to change this into a peaceful city. This is what a mayor is responsible from.
Thank you very much, Mr. Aksoy, for very profound answer. And I think you partially answered the question from Yasemin about political repercussions of these things. And I think we have a question from Victoria Litvinenko from Ukraine. Victoria, would you like to unmute your microphone and read your question, or should I read it?
Ви зачитайте, будь ласка.
No, you read it, please.
Okay. Thank you very much, Victoria. Victoria had a very interesting question regarding working with beggars. Could you please tell how communication with beggars and authorities was established? How did you inform them about possibility to support? Was it individual consultations? Was it collective consultations? How it worked? Because this is really interesting example of prevention policy from ghettoization, which you just talked about.
To whom is the question?
I think this question to Mr. Aksoy from Gaziantep.
Evet, teşekkür ediyorum tekrar.
Thank you.
Tabii ki şehir bu kadar bir anda sayının artmasıyla birlikte
When we had so many people in the city, many things changed. Yes, this is an industrial city. We have an organized industrial zone and we have small-scale industrial zones, but also either because of some people are abusing the situation or because they are in a situation where they cannot work. We had this problem. You know, we have municipal police. We made a meeting with governor's office, with the police and with municipal police. We made meetings. First, we took all the beggars to the municipal police center. And our social workers had asked the question why they were begging. They looked at their socioeconomic lives. Was this just a habit, or did that person really need this? If that person is really needy, we supported them as the governor's funds and with our funds. But if this is just a habit for that beggar, we told them the legal framework. We told them that begging is a crime, especially if children are forced to begging. There would be sanctions, and they had to face the sanctions. And this would cause negative repercussions. And we had received positive results from this approach. Governor's office and municipal police and with the security forces, we told them about the sanctions related to begging. Either they gave up or they didn't need to continue this activity. And also we had some employment policies in order to find them a job. Now some of them are working.
Thank you very much, all participants, for these really interesting questions. And I think we have some questions which we could ask during next calls, because they require even more profound consideration. For instance, we have a couple of questions: how central government and municipal government work. And it was a question from Mariana, how to raise funds for these activities. And it was a very good point from Oxana, how different cities manage to attract different resources, with really interesting examples from small cities in Moldova. But we're running out of time, and I don't feel that we are running out of time because the discussion was so engaging. But time is clicking, and I have to come to the end, bring this meeting to the end. And I pass floor back to Darini to tell us about next events and where we could find recordings and all materials from this meeting. Thank you very much for really, really interesting presentations and discussions. Darine, please, floor.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much, everyone, for attending. I want to thank our speakers for very rich insights, and to our participants who actually made the conversation what it is. I'm sharing in the chat with you the link where the recording is going to be uploaded very soon. Today was the last Urban Talk of our summer series, so we're taking a break and leaving everyone have a little bit of a rest in August, but stay tuned, follow us on our social media, and we'll be announcing there when we're back with a new programming. But definitely there's a lot of interest in those talks, and we've been having so rich conversations the past few weeks. Thank you everyone who joined and who made those spaces for conversation as fruitful as they were. Thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of your summer, everybody.